One of the hardest things, I think, is for a company like, we interviewed guys at Codemasters. Have any of you heard of Codemasters? Big traditional developer and publisher of traditional console games, and their COO, Frank Sagnier, said that actually in the last year or two, he looks at the market and he looks at the free-to-play mobile vertical and he thinks to himself, my God, why can't I take my team and start making some fantastic mobile free-to-play games? But he can't. They've tried. And sometimes when you're thinking about the platform that you're wanting to build your game for, also think about your team that's working around you and whether you can make that jump. How many of you maybe have been involved with teams where the platform that you were building the game for was thought about before the game concept itself? Anybody got any? Yeah, please. What was more important first, the game concept or the platform?
Thank you. I think they were equal, but as everybody knows, mobile is the king, so we need to create for mobile platforms. That's a must. So without mobile, our game wouldn't exist. So we had an order to make it in mobile, but also web version, browser integrations, and so on.
How many agree with that statement? Mobile is king. Hands up. Very interesting. I mean, it's an interesting phrase. I mean, I actually don't agree with you, but I mean, if you look at some of the growth of some of the biggest games out there, look at the Red Project guys, I would actually sometimes say that mobile isn't always king, and it depends on the game that you're building and the audience you're building it for, which is why I think that that's the order. But you had something to say about, who raised their hand just now?
Well, we're doing the mobile games also, and as you said, the platform is the key factor for us, because when doing mobile, the most tricky part is doing the controls right. So if we do a concept of the game, the second question is, okay, what will be the controls? And I think this is the key factor for doing the mobile games, to get the controls right, because there are no set foundations for console games. When you play an FPS game and you grab a controller, you don't have to do a tutorial to tell the people how to play an FPS game. They know that, but it's different from mobile games, so it's a bit tricky.
How many people, hands up, believe free-to-play, freemium games are king?
Basically, my team, we follow the audience in terms of platform and everything. We have an IP, so the team I'm working for is making a game after IP. So the major key was an audience. It was an audience. Then we figured out where this audience spend their time, and after that we came up with a platform and all this stuff. So we follow our buyer. So we follow the customers.
Brilliant. And no, definitely not. I don't think it's an option for everybody, but I also think that moving, for example, a development team that's made premium games into freemium is, again, a huge step. Talking with some guys yesterday, they said to me, hey, Simon, can you, we've just had a really successful title, console title, and we're building a browser version, and we're building a mobile version, a tablet version, and we want to make it free to play. And I asked him, well, how many years has your company been making these console games? And he said 5. And I said, I think you're going to find that an extremely difficult task within 6 to 12 months to do. And that we have seen with companies such as Codemasters. They released Auto Club Revolution, which is a massive success, especially in Asia and China, console game. And for a whole year, their free-to-play web version never made any money, not one dime. It took a hell of a long time to get the culture and get the play mechanics, the tutorials right, And it's not something that a development team can just switch on and do. So you've got your concept, you've built up your game, you're going into soft launch, everybody's on board. How many of you think that a marketing strategy or bringing your marketeers into the game development process is important? Show of hands, how many? Why do you not? Do you mind me? Anybody else that would, anybody that doesn't agree with that would like to say why they don't think that's important? Nobody? Nobody wants to say why not? Okay. It's interesting, the developers we surveyed said 80% of them said they regret not bringing marketing into the game concept stage. And for those of you working at developers and publishers, I cannot implore you to please do that. I'll give you a great example. So we started working with a game developer on a marketing strategy. This was, say, 2 years ago for a browser game. And we wanted to test 2 different landing pages to see which one converted better for the game. Very, very simple thing you would have thought to do. But because of the platform that they had built the game on was built in such a way where any addition to just try something like an A/B test and see the flow of the users, they converted and became paying players, it would have required 20 man-hours to adjust the platform to be able to cope with 2. It's incredible. I mean, it was so just a very simple example of how all these techniques, post-conversion data to see how the performance of marketing campaigns can be added. Have you got the right platform that can connect with different APIs to measure what is going on in your game? It's absolutely crucial to think about these things as early in the game development process as possible. It really is, guys, because sometimes I feel as though you have a situation where you're building this game and you're in this little cocoon and all you're wanting to build is the most amazing game, but you forget that also you've got to allow people to market it, people to sell it, people to reach out to that audience, and how are they going to be able to do that? Another developer I met yesterday, so they're soft launching the game next week, mobile game. So I said, obviously I'd love them to work with iQU, but just out of interest, who's your analytics partner? How are you tracking your in-game data to know what your players are doing? And he said, we haven't. I said, I mean, I can name you 5 free analytics tools today, now, that you could just go off the shelf, get their API, and at least you'll know what's happening with your gamers when you launch the game. And he said, no. And I said, so how are you going to make your decisions about what to change in the game after it's launched? And he said, well, we'll talk about it with the team. I mean, fair enough. Maybe it'll be a success, maybe it won't. But the approach was quite fascinating, I thought. And yet another example of where I think data and marketing have a huge, huge role to play. And the earlier that the development teams that you're working with can integrate, understand exactly what they're reading, without a doubt, the better. So you've launched your game, and you're looking at your stats, if you have got stats, whether you're using external partners or internal. We've identified, and I know this sounds as though maybe some of you have heard it, but retention, engagement, monetization, and virality, I think, are the 4 KPIs that are essential for everybody in your company to understand. But what does retention mean to you? Anybody here in the hall would like to tell me what they think, in their eyes, retention means?
I personally think that it's a bigger subject because retention can be measured in such many ways. And from my experience, I often think that that many games and analytics focus only on a basic retention of how many players registered and how many players left in the game after 1, 3, 7, 14, 21, and 30 days. But this indicator is very dependent on the marketing strategies, because if we find a really bad traffic, then the retention is becoming worse, and it's not because of our game. So I prefer to measure retention based on engaged users. So after they reach certain level, which I think that players that are not interested in the game at all, so just install, open it, and decide it's not my type. So it's better to measure retention from certain level reached by a player than just by installed users. If you want to measure if your game successfully keep your players.
Anybody want to have a go at what? I think there's actually a very big difference between retention KPIs and engagement KPIs. Anybody would like to say what they feel an engagement KPI is and how it differs from retention ones?
Well, it depends on the type of game that you have, but usually it's like a summary of different actions taken by a user or player in the game. So if we have like a lot of, let's say, slot machines, because I'm in the social casino business, so we look at the basic engagement like this: how many machines have a player explored, basically, like in the first session, in the second session, and so on. And we have found out, which is like pretty obvious, that an engaged user will have a bigger retention factor, and they will like most likely monetize pretty soon. So yeah, that's it for us.
The way we look at it, and I think there's two elements to data. Data's great, but data is only as good as the intelligent decisions that you make based on it. I think the first thing that every game has to have is at least they're gathering the data in the first place. Are they measuring it correctly? Have they understood and identified what are the measurements that you want to look at on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis? But then making the decisions based on the data you're looking at, the business intelligence, is not easy. And there are people that can help you with that, or if you happen to have talented people in-house, that's fantastic. Because I actually believe that there is a difference between retention and engagement. Retention is a quantitative KPI. It's a number. It's the number of people who remain within your game after 1 day, 7 days, 30 days. The number of people who become, in a free-to-play game, a paying player. But engagement is a qualitative KPI. It actually speaks more about the content of your game. So, for example, what we encourage our partners to look at when they talk about engagement is things like session length. So once somebody has come back after 7 days, how long are they playing in that game? Because retention KPIs, as you say, have a lot of other factors apart from the content of the game that can affect it. And maybe you're going to make the wrong decisions about how you may want to change your game if you don't understand what the KPIs are saying to you. And where, for example, you've got low engagement KPIs, low session lengths, that will point to maybe content relating to the game. Whereas maybe a retention KPI may point to a tutorial issue, because if the tutorial isn't saying enough about what the game is in a short amount of time, you've lost your player in the first place. You don't even have a chance to engage with them because they've gone. So understanding what the KPIs in your game and what they're saying to you will help you build a much better game. Social factors, social KPIs, virality. How many of you guys have been involved in games where that is considered from the very, very beginning, rather than as an add-on at the end? Anybody else want to speak, apart from the lovely gentleman on the left from Ganymede? Please tell us about how you guys approach virality and social factors within the game.
Well, because my game is like 3 years old right now, well, I want to say that basically we have found out that virality isn't the king. When we began to make this game, we were thinking that we should involve as many social features as we could, because we were considering like organic growth or organic like player gathering. So we thought this will be like our key factor. But once we found out after like 2 years that we are not really gathering an organic traffic from players, and they are not really engaged in social features. So either we've done something wrong, or like this wasn't really the key, because like game is growing by itself, and we have begin traffic acquisitions, and like that's all I got to say about it. So yeah.
In terms of building a game, which of the 4 factors does this audience think is the most important? So a show of hands, we've got retention, we've got engagement, monetization, and social KPIs. In terms of the data that you're tracking in your game, how many of you guys here think that retention is the most important KPI to focus on? And then engagement, and then monetization, and last but not least, social, the K factor as they call it. So yeah, interesting. All 4 is one. I do believe it is a mixture. What I think is actually is also the time of the game. At what stage in the development cycle is your game? If you're in a soft launch, the reality is that monetization, as long as you have thought about it and you've got some plans in place, the reality is if you can't retain or engage your users in the first place, there isn't anything to monetize. So actually, at the very early stage of a game, I would suggest retention is one of the most important, just followed by engagement. Then going into your soft launch itself, engagement becomes extremely important to make sure that those early adapters, those early users of your game are hanging around. And then once they're hanging around, you need to meet your monetization KPIs. So once the game is commercially launched and you're tracking your KPIs, then what really happens in terms of how does the game change? How often do you change your game? Once your game went live, how many times a month, a week did you and your guys make any changes to the game?
Well, I think that really depends on the game, because if you have a story-based game, there's not many things you can really change after the launch. In our case, our game was a turn-based strategy MMO, so we had regular content updates and bug fixes. Like, well, basically every day. The game was built in a way that we didn't have to put a new app in the store. We just did it on the back end, so the players didn't see the updates. Basically, the game was just changing live.
I want to hit on your social comment, though, because that ties into that. If you've got a very engaged community within your game that's also talking to each other about the game, updates are so incredibly important for a game at the moment. We're working with a developer where we've actually done a great big study. It's for a game called Bungee Mummy. And we're very, very involved with these guys. We really want to help them deliver a successful game, and so we did even a behavioral study for them. So we even did a study where 20 players sat in a room, and in the old-fashioned market research days, we literally watched them and produced a report for the developers, and that really help them identify which things to change. The problem is that since the update that improved so many features in the game was done a month ago, only 40% of people that have pre-installed the game have installed the update. They either have deleted the app from their device because there wasn't anything engaging there, or it's just got lost, or they're not ignoring the notifications. The thing with a social community, though, will mean that your chances, and we've seen this with there's a company called Get Social, which is doing and very active in this area of building social communities for game developers. And what they've seen is that when it comes to updates, the increase in the speed at which people download the update can be as much as a factor of 50% than those that don't. So suddenly you've got 50% more players who are playing the latest version of the game. Might not be vital for the game strategy, but once again it talks about the development cycle. You've got a live game. Engage with your community proactively. With an engaged community, you've got a far more likely chance to have better monetization and better chance to engage with the guys and get those updates out there. So I've got a couple of minutes left, and obviously now the audience seems to have doubled, miraculously in the last 20 minutes. So when we started, there was just a small group. Going back to the whole way in which this idea started in my head about who has the greatest factor in the creation of successful games, the powers of creativity, the development team, art, in other words, versus science. We are creating entertainment. We are creating yet another form of what people do in their leisure time. Just a quick show of hands here and see whether it agrees with the developers I talked to. How many people feel as though the forces of data and science go more towards creating a successful game than art and creativity? Quick show of hands. Bit of doubting there, bit of doubting. And then obviously the rest of you think that art, creative influences are more important. It was overwhelmingly with the developers that we talked to, and it's the EAs, the Ubisofts, the Woogers. They said 65% said data contributed more to the success of the games that they had brought out that were, okay, yes, financially successful for them. I think you've got to have a great balance, as with everything in life, but I think when you look at it overall, when you've got, I think it's 10,000 apps per month being released, maybe 5 years ago you could release a wonderfully great concept for a great game, and you would find your audience, or the audience would find you. I think when you're talking about a vertical that is so competitive and is swamped with choices for great content, having a great creative team and a great concept isn't as powerful as it used to be, and strong and solid data are, I would suggest, king today. So before I finish, have I got a couple of minutes? Anybody? Yeah, so I wanted to open it up to questions.
So my question is, what is your advice for small shops, small teams that are starting in the business? Yeah, because usually at the beginning we have a nice concept, we have a dream about game that we would like to play. On the other side, you mentioned that all the data, analytics, marketing is crucial in that business. So small shops usually at the beginning doesn't have any money for that part. So what is your advice how to start? Because as early as we start thinking about marketing, data, all that stuff, it's better, yeah? But at the beginning, usually we do not have money for that. So what is your advice?
I was going to ask about the similar thing, but I would like to stage it, because let's say you have a big company that's starting a new product, and you have all the like developers that you want. You have marketers, you have analytics guys. You can create your dream team. So you are creating MVP, and what is your dream team for this MVP? So like, you know, the minimal team that will make a successful game. What is needed?
Well, I'll try to answer both questions at once. A number of people I don't think is relevant. If you look at, I think King have, I think the latest count was between 2,000 and 3,000 employees worldwide. 2,000 to 3,000. How many employees does Supercell have? Does anybody know? It's less than 100. So I don't actually think in answering your question, it's the number of people that directly affects how, whether you can build a successful team. Yeah, I think with a company like yours, to build a new version of your slot product, I would have thought you need at least a team of 20 to begin to start to really, from all the different disciplines, to make that happen. In your case, I think the indie has a tough time. There's no doubt about it. One, there are a lot of free products out there. We have one, but forget about ours. But there are a ton of data-related products out there that are for free. Game Analytics has a great one, Delta DNA. Talk to them, use them. Everybody's got free trials, okay? And you may think as, from the point of view of these things as being non-urgent or important at the time, but I strongly urge you to play with these tools to find what's happening, because you can already see what's happening in your game at an early stage that will help you build a better game before you even get to soft launch. That's the first thing. And then, to be honest with you, you want to be finding yourself a marketing partner early. A good marketing partner or a good publisher should be able to work with you from an early stage to help you with all of the things that you're talking about. A good monetization strategy, a good marketing plan for when you launch. And because of the experience that they've got, that's exactly where they should be helping you build that successful game. So get in and talk to these guys as early as possible. Bring them involved into the process, because ultimately, anybody that is working with you, a publisher should be earning their money already for you now. Because if they're doing 50-50 after net, the more successful your game is, the more money they're going to make when it's launched. But it's not easy. And there are some good smaller publishers out there that can help. We may be able to help you if the game's right as well. But I think the one danger you've got as an indie is to be signing yourself up with a publisher that has a huge portfolio. It's just going to be difficult for any guys to be working on a large portfolio as well across all the titles as possible.
My question is, could you perhaps name or choose one AAA or similar title you worked on, for example, PC title, and you worked on with a certain company, the developers, to help them to monetize, to promote, to gather audience and so on. And how did your work influence the overall shape of this game, the final shape of this game? So I mean, if you could compare the initial concept or the prototype with what the game became after you put your hands on it as a promotion, monetization consultant.
Well, first of all, we don't do PC games, but mostly focus on free-to-play browser and mobile, obviously, and tablet games. That is, the premium vertical is not our expertise. I would much rather send you, which I'm more than happy to do, some case studies as to how we did that. Bungee Mummy actually is a very good case in point. We've also done a lot of work with guys like Sproying with Asterix and Friends. That was another good example of guys that we use data and we get giving them monthly game reports back that, using the data, informed them as to what features in the game to change and update. The problem is, a lot of this data is unfortunately quite private to the guys that we work with, so I can't always say, well, we did this and then the monetization went like that, and unfortunately I'd much rather have a much more open industry, which would be nice if we shared things a bit more, but some of the partners that we work with are a little bit protective of their data. That's the problem with too many venture capitalists involved in this industry, but anyway. Okay. Oh, one last one. One last one? Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I have maybe some option for the guy who talk about the missing money for marketing or from some projects about strategy. I work at university, and sometimes small companies come to our university and ask for help. For example, they would like to know how their market, their competitors looks like, and we at our classes ask our students to prepare some specific projects for these companies for free, and then they have some data. Maybe they aren't yeah, but they are for free, yeah, and they give you some information about how the market looks like. So every time there is some option.
And the last one there is, do you know some of the accelerator programs like execution labs or game founders? They can be very, very useful for you guys to talk to, and some of the guys are here. I can connect you with no problem if you want to exchange cards later. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.